Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, June 19th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. Commending to your attention our July-August issue, now available at commentary.org. The overarching theme of the issue is the war against the Jews, and how is the effort to counter the outbreak of anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, and indeed Iranian missilery and Houthi missilery and Gaza missilery. How is that faring in the 19 months since the hostages were taken? Danielle Pletka of AEI has a follow-up to her last year piece on how to take action legally in the courts and in Congress. And she is offering a status report on how that is going. Stephen Pollard, of the formerly of the Jewish Chronicle of London, offers a view of the war on Israel by the Global South, once called the Third World, now called the Global South, and the NGOs and associated organizations around the world, like the UN, that are participating in the jackalry. We have Tal Fortgang on the slander that is Trump is not a friend of the Jews, even though he looks like a friend of the Jews, but he isn't really a friend of the Jews, and what it means when Jews say that somebody who is being friendly to them isn't being unfriendly to them, and why that is an infamy. And we have an editorial on how Israel and Iran got to this point, and on Israel's role in the history of world Jewry in terms of its existence to protect and defend the continued existence and the flourishing of the Jewish people. And then I have a rant, which is called We Are Awesome, and we being the Jews, and you can take it from there. So it's a very rich issue. We have Matt Continetti. We talked about your piece yesterday about the liberal enablers of the radical left. And Christine, you have a piece in the issue. Christine Rosen, our social commentary columnist. Christine, and your piece is?
Well, since I missed the lively podcast discussion a few weeks ago about masculinity, I ended up writing a little bit about the cultural and political left's attempts to court men and why that is doomed to failure and how they got themselves in this situation in the first place.
Right. So there's Christine Rosen. Of course, I'm doing everything now backwards. Hi, Christine. And we've already heard a little bit from Matt Continetti, our Washington commentary columnist. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
We haven't heard.
You haven't heard.
I mentioned you. I invoked you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your mere mention of someone indicates that we've heard from them.
Yes. To your embodiment.
My dulcet tones.
Yes. And of course, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
So we're in this sort of period of waiting. We're waiting for the big shoe to drop. I think it's pretty clear that a big shoe is going to drop. I think we yesterday we kind of laid out the three possibilities, which are the U.S. strikes Fordow, which is the final nail in the coffin of the Iranian nuclear program, should that facility be destroyed. Israel strikes Fordow without the U.S., which will be a much more complex operation, or at the last minute, the Iranians say uncle agree to unconditional surrender, which would take the form of them agreeing to the destruction of their nuclear program, which I think we would all watch basically live on television to make sure that everything was blown up, and blown up real good, as they used to say on SCTV. One of those three is going to happen. I don't think something is going to happen. Trump made it very clear yesterday as he was putting up his flagpoles and doing all that his patience is at an end. He's not negotiating. If the Iranians want to come to the table, they will come to the table to have terms dictated to them. And then I think the key moment happened yesterday with this Iranian strike on an Israeli hospital. Fortunately, hospital evacuated almost entirely before the missile hit the site. And basically the Israeli government saying that now the Ayatollah Khamenei, the head of state and the head of government and the head of the faith and the 17th Imam and whatever is now a military target of Israel and will be gone after. So that's where we stand on the precipice of very large steps.
A couple other things happened. Trump still hasn't made up his mind. As he said to reporters yesterday, Wednesday, June 18th, nobody knows what's going to happen. And he then said that he likes to make, this was in the afternoon, he says, I wait to the last minute to make my decisions because situations change.
He said, I like to make my decision the minute before I do something.
Yeah. Which anyone who, 10 years now, we know that's the case. So unclear whether he's made his mind up. We do know, according to reporting, that he has authorized the war plan, but he has not given the go order. People have said that in the past, Trump has reversed his orders to strike Iran while the planes are mid-air. This was, of course, after the Iranians downed a U.S. drone in 2019. Trump was prepared to strike, and the F-16s were in the air, and then Trump turned them around because he decided ultimately that a drone was not the same as an American life, and therefore he would not retaliate. Now, what the coverage of this story leaves out is that the Iranians and their militias in Syria and Iraq continued to strike at American targets after Trump reversed his order, and indeed led to the deaths of American contractors. And then, in January 2020, Trump destroyed Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the IRGC. And Iran's response, I think very importantly, was minimal. There was a response. Several of our soldiers did have injuries, but at the end of the day, that was the end of the exchange at the time between the United States and Iran. Trump is an escalate to de-escalate guy. And if you're an Iranian right now, if you're part of the coterie surrounding the Ayatollah Khamenei, you're going to have to think about things pretty seriously. If Trump does give the order for the United States to destroy Fordo, in Trump's mind, I think he's thinking of it as a pretty surgical strike. We have the capability to do this. Israelis say they could do it, but it would be much harder and it would take longer. We take out Fordo. As far as Trump is concerned, maybe we take out a few other targets on the way, but that would be it. That would be it. And if you're the Ayatollah and the head of the IRGC and you decide to retaliate against America as a result of that, well, then you mean a longer war, you mean a more destructive war for Iran, and I think ultimately you mean the end of your regime. So that's what the Iranians have to consider right now.
I am fascinated by the way history rhymes. So we are 10 years, not only from Trump coming down the escalator, but from the Iran deal having been struck, not this week, but the Iran deal having been struck and having gone through this remarkably distortive process in the American political system where this clear treaty between the United States and Iran was not submitted to Congress as a treaty, and Democrats running the Senate flipped everything around so that when senators had to vote on this deal, they had to vote in the negative instead of in the positive. It was structured in a complicated way so that rather than saying, I affirmatively support the JCPOA, you actually had to vote. I mean, I can't quite remember how it worked, but it was
so confusing. It was topsy-turvy.
In 2015, and this is an important number to remember as we go into the polling right now, in 2015, 60 to 65% of the American people opposed the Iran nuclear deal. Poll after poll after poll, and indeed, I think 62 senators voted against it, but it needed 67. That was the weird distortion of the treaty rule, because in treaties, you need 2/3 of the Senate to approve a treaty. In legislation, you don't need 2/3 of the Senate to approve or disapprove anything. You do need enough senators in certain cases to bring a vote to the floor of the Senate. That's called cloture. That's 60 votes. I don't want to get into like the weeds here, but basically the American people opposed the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, and Obama and the Democrats pushed it through. And so they pushed it through in opposition and defiance of even a majority of their own supporters. I believe, or at least a plurality of their supporters were opposed to the deal. Flash forward to 2025. The polling is astounding. CNN polling, other polling, 80% of American people do not want Iran to get a bomb, and something like between 70 and 80% support military action to ensure that Iran does not get a bomb. That is a consistent number now, if you think about it, over 10 years. The American people have always not wanted Iran to get a bomb. And now we have the affirmative fact that the American people believe that we have military power precisely to do something like prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. Meanwhile, and I think this is something that is of particular interest to Abe, we're spending all this time discussing breaches and divisions on the MAGA right over how, whether or not this should happen. We're getting involved in another forever war, and Israel is drawing us into another conflict in the Middle East, and all of that, where polling suggests that the MAGA base, the Republicans, everybody, including Democrats, or at least are 50-50, are for making sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb and all that attends. So what do you make of that, Abe? Why is this of such passionate interest to you?
Well, the press is treating it as a sort of interesting internecine fight in MAGA, which it is, and it is interesting. Trump has acknowledged it. He said yesterday, yeah, some people in the base are a little upset. He said, but many people outside my base altogether are so happy they can't believe it. But the coverage of the stories, there was one in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal about the MAGA dissenters on attacking Iran, describes those dissenters as far-right podcasters, far-right figures, without ever saying they are overt anti-Semites. They talk about Candace Owens. They talk about Tucker, without mentioning that these people have on Holocaust deniers or deny the Holocaust themselves, and so on. That's the story. The story is the Jew haters who were always lurking in the shadows of the MAGA core are angry.
Well, and they're joining forces with the Jew haters on the progressive left who aren't so much in the shadows or even in, just restricted
they're the
to
mayoral
social
figure of
media.
the race from there.
In some cases, they are in the United States Congress. And I think this is an important distinction we have to draw. All of the talk of the divisions in the MAGA base, well, the real division is between the influencers and podcasters who oppose American intervention to end the Iranian nuclear program, and Donald Trump. That's the division. Donald Trump, as he's been saying, has been absolutely clear on this issue for a decade. Yesterday, he said, I've been clear on it for 15 years. Maybe I haven't gone that far back.
You'd have to go
Howard
back
Stern
and see
archives.
what he said on the WWF Saturday Night Mayhem.
Fine, I'll take it.
Yeah,
and we can know that the division is being hyped by the media and by the influencers by looking at the United States Congress. So, sure, you have this corner of MAGA podcasters, Tucker, Dave Smith, Candace Owens,
comic Dave Smith,
Dave Smith, as we're always supposed to tell.
By the way, my wife has worked in comedy for 30 years. Never heard of him.
You know what?
That's how comic he is.
This is an aside, but I want to hear how Tony Hinchcliffe views this issue. The
Yeah.
comic who spoke at the MSG rally and who has a Netflix special, because I have a feeling he might have a different take.
There is a world of actual comics, right? You mentioned Tony Hinchcliffe. There's Nate Bargatze. There is Matt Rife. There is this world of
younger comics. Yeah,
anti-woke comics. And I'm sure that they are where most anti-wokeism would be in this case, which is sort of Team America World Police. Like if they were going to take their military doctrine from popular culture, it wouldn't be from Joe Rogan. It would be from Team America World Police and its famous theme song, America F Yeah.
But the truth is, it's not even, it's America F Yeah, for sure. But it's not Team America World Police anymore. Trump doesn't believe in Team America World Police. Yeah. It's Team America, let's bomb Fordo, and that's it. That's the end of the story. And the best expression of this I heard on my hate listen up this morning on NPR, whatever it's called. But they quoted, covering the gruesome and barbaric attack on the hospital by Iranian missiles. They talked to an Israeli who said, only Trump can end this. And then the Israeli goes, B-52, boom, boom. That's it. B-52, boom, boom. That's all we need. To return to the point I wanted to make, though, is the United States Congress. So you have Rand Paul, you have
Thomas Massey,
the egregious Thomas Massey, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay,
right.
Maybe one or two others. That's it.
Right. Well, let's do a count. Right. There are 250. There are 218 Republicans in the House, and there are 53 Republicans
in the Senate.
So there's 271 Republicans, and we can name 3
off the top of our heads,
right? And I can name 10 in the Democratic Party off the top of my head
easily.
And that's just off the top of my head, and I'm sure it's probably more like they represent 10 out of 100.
Right.
So
who better reflects the MAGA base? Donald Trump and the overwhelming majority of the Republicans in Congress, or Christopher Murphy,
but
the Democrat from Connecticut?
There's a fascinating story that I would rather these reporters have told instead of just the Tucker Carlson bickering with Ted Cruz, which is actually worth watching to see the split between the influencers and the actual political leaders, because I thought Cruz, who can be deeply annoying in many ways, he comes across as much more palatable in that exchange than Carlson. Carlson puts up snippets that make him look tough, where he makes his kind of now meme-like Tucker surprise face. But what about J.D. Vance? Because he's got a very interesting path to thread here. He obviously wants to claim the MAGA mantle, and he is pretty isolationist. And on foreign policy, he doesn't really pull his punches when describing the people he disagrees with, even in his own coalition. So it's been interesting to watch him navigate this. And it'll be also interesting to see how much he's involved in the decision-making. There's some reporting today about who is actually in the room with Trump in the last few days. And one of those people who isn't, evidently, is Hegseth. So that's another sort of, just those coalitions are constantly in motion, and the reporting on it isn't necessarily reliable. But where is Vance on all this?
Okay, well, it's time now for some exclusive Commentary Magazine podcast reporting.
Wow.
Sirens. I want some sirens. I want some, this is, I am
How about
shoe
the
leather.
Noises of
I am
backing up
meeting
garbage
people in
can.
garages late at night in a trench coat, sunglasses. I've heard from 3 different people now that Vance is fully on board with this, that Vance is admiring of the Israeli action, that he characterizes Trump as somebody who decided, after making a good faith effort to bring Iran to the table to make a deal, which is what he wanted, that there was no negotiating with these people, and that once that happened, there was nowhere for anyone to go but to understand that if he couldn't see his way clear to saying that Iran, we could make a deal with Iran, that there was no deal, to be made with Iran. And then there's another interesting detail. This is not
but
mine.
can I just ask,
Yes.
from what principle is Vance coming to that position beyond
The principle that he is the vice president and Trump is the president, and
Right.
in order to be the nominee in 2028, he needs Donald Trump's
Well, there is
endorsement.
that, and then there is also, and I think this is important, the Israeli execution of the beginning of this fight was the linchpin moment. It was, they know what they're doing. They're exposing the hollowness of their enemy, and their incredible competence means that if you were going to be picking a side, you pick their side, because they're showing every indication of winning. No, this is an
I
important
know. I'm not
element.
going to question your reporting.
Don't you? You know what? You better not. This is outrageous. I'm taking you.
I don't question shoe leather reporting. I won't.
No, but I'm just saying what I have heard is that both Trump and Vance were dumbstruck,
right,
by how extraordinarily capable Israel has proved to be. Now, remember, this is an important detail. So he wasn't president during 24. So he was not present when Israel took out the Iranian. Now, he heard about it. He took out the Iranian air defenses.
Yeah.
He watched it. He heard about it. Maybe he was briefed about it after the election. But he is watching in real time as this military does things no military has ever done before, and with a kind of assurance and focus that means if what you're looking for is some indication that you're not backing a loser, you're not backing a loser. He never wants to back a loser. Right. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying there's any principle here per se.
Right. I just want to make a couple points about Vance. I mean, clearly he would be opposed to American intervention in this operation. I mean, everything we know about his foreign policy, really even preceding his change of mind about Trump, suggests that he does not believe in American intervention overseas unless absolutely necessary. So he is, I think, deferring to his commander-in-chief, as he should. And I thought that Vance's post on X from the other day, I think Tuesday afternoon, was a very articulate explanation of what was happening and what the Trump administration offered the Iranians and how the Iranians rejected it and why we had reached this impasse. And Vance says there, Trump may have to do something more to make sure the Iranians don't get a bomb. To me, that was basically Vance climbing on board the Trump policy. And that's important for the administration. That's important, I think, for Vance. And I hope that one thing Vance learns, if we do strike Fordo, is that, there are places where only America can do the job. It does not mean the major land-based regime change that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. It can mean punitive strikes with targeted objectives. And we do not need to pursue, as a goal of this policy, the collapse of the Iranian regime. So I hope that's one outcome of a still fluid situation. I'll also say that Vance clearly has time to go on Blue Sky, which he did yesterday, and he started an account on this progressive social media service, really, I think, just to troll everybody there. And he did so successfully, and now he's apparently been kicked out. And he also has time to get into a fight with David Reboy, who is a MAGA, I think, a MAGA influencer. It's definitely a conservative influencer based in Florida. And that fight actually, I think, took place before Vance's long statement on the Iranian policy. So he's definitely spending a lot of time online, and where I would hope he'd also be spending, and I'm sure he is, I'm sure he's capable to do both, also involved in the planning and the deliberation for what is coming. On Hegseth, Hegseth is a lot like Kristi Noem, I think, in that he is a television communicator. That's essentially why he's there. He looks the part. He does PT with the troops. He can communicate the Trump objectives. And he's not there because he has the bureaucratic savvy of Robert Gates and Donald Rumsfeld, or the strategic mind of James Schlesinger and Paul Wolfowitz, right? Who was never SecDef, but he was deputy. He's there to communicate the policy. What I think is interesting is no one knows the policy yet. Right?
Or who
we
is
know
making
that,
it? Well,
we know that
exactly.
we're
Who's
supporting
running?
Israel.
Yeah.
We know that we're supporting Israel, and we know that we don't want Iran to get a nuke, but we don't really know what we're going to do about it. And
Well,
I
and
have
that's
noticed
important,
that
though, because
Hegseth. Oh, just 1 second. I noticed that Hegseth has not been that visible because I think he's waiting for Trump to decide. And moreover, internally, since Hegseth is an exterior-facing figure, internally, I would much rather have General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General Kurilla, the chairman of CENTCOM, the leader of the Central Command, to do the planning. I have no problem that they're taking a lead here,
Right?
Because Hegseth is there to communicate. And just finally, there is one cabinet member who deserves a lot of scrutiny right now, and I do believe is very much on the outs right now. And that is the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. And she is in an extremely tenuous position because you have had the President of the United States say on Air Force One to the entire world, I don't care what she thinks. I mean, when you have your boss, much less the president, say, I don't care what you think, you may want to reconsider your employment choices.
Yes.
Well, that statement combined with the Hegseth, and I agree. I mean, but Hegseth could have been put in a position where he could do that without actually having the title and cabinet level position that he has. He could have been head of recruitment. He could have been the communications person, done all the same stuff. I think it does lead to a sense of not really knowing who's in charge, and then you add to that Trump going, I don't know, I make my mind up at the last minute, and I think it kind of creates anxiety in some sense among people worried about is this methodically being decided? I agree with you, Matt. I think the military planners are doing their thing, and they've been moving assets, closer to the conflict, sending a signal to Iran. All those things, all the things we usually do as a superpower, we're doing. I know some of this is messaging, but it does lend a sense of chaos to it, which I think Trump enjoys. But again, the American people, perhaps maybe if he does decide to strike, I would actually like him to see a pretty traditional televised message explaining the position, explaining what we're doing, and telling the American people why it's important.
But at the same time, there is something uniquely transparent about all this. When Trump says, I don't care what she thinks, he means I don't care what she thinks.
Yeah.
And
it's very direct.
And when Trump says I wait till the last second because things change, he means I wait a second because there's a sort of transparency here, and it's also transparently clear that he is the guy who's going to make the decision. I mean that's always the case, but everyone, the counsel of everyone else has a limited impact on him, I think.
Well, and it wasn't the case for the previous administration.
No,
so in that sense, it's actually a healthy reassertion of presidential role.
Autopen made the decision.
Yeah. Well, so something interesting happened in the intelligence discussion over the last couple of days. People who are, particularly in the media, who are attempting to do whatever they can to retard the possibility that the United States will take action, have become very fond of citing this thing that Tulsi Gabbard herself cited, I think in April, which was that there had been an intelligence assessment inside the intelligence community that Iran was years away from a bomb, not months away or weeks away. I bring this up because people have been invoking it and saying, essentially hinting that the push to go at Iran because of the direct threat that it poses has weird echoes of the run-up to the Iraq War, where we exaggerated, overestimated whatever the threat posed by directly by Iraq with these supposedly ruinous consequences. John Ratcliffe, who is the director of the CIA and was the director of national intelligence in the first Trump term, went before Congress and essentially attacked Tulsi Gabbard's position and this report from the intelligence community by saying, so here's the story. Everybody agrees. If you have a football team and they march down the field and they go 99 yards and they're on the 1 yard line and they're sitting on the 1 yard line, you can say, well, they're not going to actually try to go in to the end zone. But that would probably be pretty stupid to assume that they weren't going to try to go into the end zone. And Iran is on the 1 yard line, having marched 99 yards down the field, having had no nuclear program 25 years ago. And now they are here. And everybody acknowledges, including the IAEA, that they are on the verge of being able to do nuclear breakout. So do you stop them beforehand, or do you deal with the world that exists once they cross in and the refs raise their arms and they are in the end zone having scored themselves as a nuclear power?
There's so much mirror imaging in a lot of the anti-intervention arguments. So the anti-interventionists in this case rely heavily on that now decades old U.S. intelligence assessment that Iran suspended its weapons program. But remember, these are the same people who correctly pointed out the U.S. Intelligence Committee's error in saying that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction prior to the 2003 Iraq War. The U.S. Intelligence Committee, hate to tell you this, I'm an American, I want the best intelligence I can get, but the U.S. Intelligence Committee does not have a very good track record. It got Iraqi WMD wrong. It got the fall of the Soviet Union wrong. It got plenty of other things wrong that our expert audience can understands and can chime in on. So it's entirely possible, in fact, I think extremely likely, that the intelligence community got this assessment wrong and has failed to update it, leaving aside what your point is great with the analogy. And the other example of mirror imaging happened in the Tucker-Ted Cruz interview that Christine mentioned. Because what was the gotcha comment that Tucker released in advance of the interview in order to show that, gosh, people who support Americans bombing Fordo are so completely out of it? It was that Tucker quizzed Senator Cruz, on the population of Iran and asked some other kind of random questions about Iranian history and Persian culture. And Senator Cruz did not have all of his answers at the ready. And the response from the non-interventionist camp was, how can you want to intervene somewhere if you don't know anything about the country? And by the way, it's not true that Senator Cruz does not know anything about Iran. It's that he was not expecting these types of questions. Nonetheless, that was their saying. How can you intervene anywhere if you don't know anything? That's the exact opposite argument than what they were making when Douglas Murray appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast with the aforementioned comic Dave Smith. And when Douglas Murray was saying to Dave Smith, have you ever been to Gaza? Do you really know what's happening on the ground? Dave Smith and his fanboys reacted by saying, we don't need to have to go to Gaza in order to have opinion on the conflict. We don't need to know all these, you snooty Brit with all your arrogant facts. We don't need to know those in order to support, Hamas. So which is it, guys? Which is it?
By the way, one of the things about the councils of war here that we're talking about, whether Hegseth's there or not, and this really remarkably stupid piece that was in Politico the other day that was elevating and explaining the central role being played by General Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, that said, boy, this administration's really weird because it's not listening to the civilians who are in control of defense and foreign policy. It's really only listening to generals. And that's new. And I'm like, people who run Politico, like maybe hire somebody who isn't 13 years old. Am I was I like, did I fall asleep and, 200 years? Yeah. General Marshall became Secretary of State. I mean, how many? Petraeus, Powell, the councils of war on Iraq, on the first Gulf War, and all of that. Schwarzkopf. Like, who do you think Bush listened to? Brent Scowcroft himself, an admiral, right? He was the national security advisor. Like, he wasn't at the time on active duty as an admiral, but nonetheless, whole point here is that generals have been involved in the making of policy, particularly as we approach war, as they should. And sometimes the civilians back off. And they're like, okay, we're going operational. So you guys are the ones who make the plans. We may be in the room. We may not be in the room. The president's the ultimate decision maker. I take your point, Christine, that it's weird that the Secretary of Defense might be a sort of weak sister.
I mean, ideally, you listen to the civilian advisors and to the military strategists, and there are constantly battles amongst them, which is healthy for a democracy and for when you have a volunteer army. But I do think that it's Trump's role here that is unusual, and I think we can see it as a response to certainly to the last administration, but also in some ways to the way the decision-making process did occur around Iraq. And it's him just saying, "I'm the decider," over and over and over again. Which also means he's going to have to take responsibility for it, and that's where I will watch very closely if anything goes wrong or anything is perceived to go wrong, how Vance and that wing of the MAGA people react, because to Matt's earlier point, they're extremely flexible in their principles when it comes to holding people to account. And if anything goes wrong here, or the American public turns at all on whatever this mission turns out to be, if there is a mission, that's what's to watch. And so I don't mind that there's a lot of bickering, or that the generals are involved. But it is Trump's role here that is, in a way, quite unique. And I agree with Abe. I appreciate the transparency after the last 4 years.
But, there is this other X factor if we're talking about making policy here, and Trump being the final decision maker about what America does, which is what the president would be in any administration at any time. But there is this X factor that I don't really think has ever existed before in this way. And that is Israeli intelligence. Now, is Israeli intelligence perfect? God, no, because the Israeli intelligence missed Hamas's underground tunnel city and completely missed the coming of October 7th, though it was being marched right in front of its eyes on these. And you didn't need to be at King Saul Boulevard in the trenches of the Israeli intelligence community to know that Hamas was playing something. You just needed to be in a watchtower looking out on Gaza to see that they were making military moves and not being listened to. So I am not here saying that the Israeli intelligence community or Israeli intelligence is perfect. Far from it. We published a huge article 2 months ago by Jonathan Foreman on the colossal intelligence failure of October 7th. However, if you want intelligence on Iran, and Iran is the subject of this discussion, you turn to Israel. Israel knew how to set a bomb in a hotel room or a guest house room 2 months earlier to lie in wait for the arrival of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, and blow him up in that hotel room. You have this opening salvo in this war last week where they got 20 senior officials and 15 or 20 nuclear scientists and killed them all simultaneously. They know where
setting
everybody
up like a fake hotline. That operation was incredible if you actually get into the details of how they got them all in the same place.
And then, of course, all the stuff that went on over the last 15 years, the introduction of the Stuxnet worm, the capture and spiriting out of Iran of the entire history and plans for the Iranian nuclear program, all of that. So if you want to know, if you need to call somebody and say, okay, what are they going to do at Fort Al? What do you think the circumstances are inside the mountain? How hardened is it? What are you going to look at the United States, which apparently has very few active assets inside Iran? No, you're going to turn to Israel for that intelligence. And that introduces an interesting note, sort of like D-Day. I mean, one of the interesting things about D-Day is, as my old family friend Hugh Weldon, who helped run the BBC for a long time, would say, is Americans are very proud of D-Day, but D-Day was a British operation. I mean, all of the intelligence, the phony war, the creation of the fake army to convince the Germans that any invasion was going to come in a different place other than Normandy, all of that, like that the D-Day operation was executed by the United States, but as a matter of intelligence and planning was largely British. And here we have a circumstance. It's maybe the only thing that I can think of, as a proper analogy here, that we are functioning in a world in which the intelligence being provided by our ally, which of course is focused on this, as has been focused on nothing before, because that subject is the existential threat to our allies' existence. Trump already clearly views as more reliable than his own intelligence community, which he doesn't trust anyway, because he thinks it's the deep state that was plotting and planning against him. So that's another weird. Yeah,
add, it's also been extremely savvy on the part of Israel and Netanyahu in particular in how they have handled those sorts of issues. Constantly saying, we're not asking for the help. We don't need it. If we don't get the bombs, we have other ways of doing this. We can put men on the ground. I mean, that actually as a PR measure is really important, because it's a constant reminder to Trump. They're putting themselves in a position still of power and saying, okay, I mean, obviously it'd be great to have this help, but we also have all these other things we're doing. And he knows it's true, because the world has seen the results of its intelligence operations, which are extraordinary.
There is one thing to.
There's just one sort of factor here that blows up those who are and this isn't the strongest anti-argument here is not intelligence based anyway. It's we have no business over there or whatever. But the fact is, Iran keeps revealing new secret nuclear plants that had been hidden before. I mean, this is a sort of, by their own admission, they're saying, "Oh yeah, we have this thing going now, and then now there's this thing that you didn't know about." That's coming from them.
I think the strongest argument they're making is they don't want America to go to war. It's an classic anti-war argument. We don't want to go to war because we don't know the potential consequences of this war. If the war could last much longer, we could expand our aims to include regime change, which would mean a far longer sustained air campaign. I still don't conceive of Donald Trump putting American ground troops in Iran for any reason. But, a Libya-type campaign went on for several weeks. So they're against that. They, implicit in a lot of their anti-war arguments is the idea that America can live with an Iranian nuke, right? That was always kind of in the background of the Obama plan, was we have a strong nuclear arsenal. Are the Iranians really going to send an ICBM to Washington, D.C.? They know that would be the end. Of course, when you're dealing with apocalyptic religious fanatics who run Iran, you don't want to run that risk. And that's why we've always supported, at least on this podcast, ending the nuclear program by force, if necessary. We've certainly reached that point today. What I've been struck by is the kind of the well, you know what? I forgot what I was struck by.
I saw that happen. That's happened to me. That's happened to me too. But I wanted to
cut this out. Cut that part out.
I wanted to mention two other aspects of the anti-war argument.
Yeah.
One of them, well stated by somebody I respect, though I disagree with, Michael Brendan Doherty, who published a piece yesterday on the National Review Online on the arguments that are being made that don't pass the smell test with him in the sort of pro-war camp. And one of them is Bibi saying, New York could be next. How do you know that New York is not next? And he's like, New York's not going to be next. I mean, come on. Like that's where you start losing me with your rhetoric. Okay. So let's just say that the people like MBD and others are right, that Iran does not pose a direct nuclear threat
Which
to the
I
United
just have to
States.
interrupt to say, maybe not nuclear, but they are in New York. There have been multiple
Yeah.
plots by Iranian terrorists
Right.
on our soil against Americans and American interests. So sorry,
Right.
not
Okay,
nuclear.
no, but that's an important point, and but after 9/11, of course, the great fear was the dirty bomb or some kind of nuclear device. That was the Cheney 1% doctrine. Like, if there's a 1% chance that an American city could be destroyed by a nuclear weapon, you have to act as though that 1% chance is a 100% chance, and act accordingly. Now, you can look at Cheney and look at the Bush foreign policy and say everything was misguided, and that's fine. However, let's talk about not that Iran is going to fire an ICBM and hit New York. That is not the threat that I think Bibi is talking about, or that anybody rational is talking about. It is, if Iran gets the bomb, we're in a new world in which people are going to be rushing around trying to get nukes. That the central argument for bombing Iran 20 years ago was this will start a rush to nuclearization among second rank and third rank countries that have not been nuclear so far, because of the obvious geopolitical advantages of having this weapon that people will bribe you, like North Korea will give you money so that you promise them you won't use it. And that's where it's not that Iran hits, it's that a world in which there is wild nuclear proliferation leads inevitably, I think, at some point, maybe 45 years from now.
And it also enhances Iran's freedom of action in the region,
completely,
as we're seeing the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right. But I'm saying directly to us. But
Sure.
the threat to us is nuclear proliferation, an era of nuclear proliferation at a time when technical capabilities are such that it would be possible at some point to create a suitcase nuclear bomb. And where would those bombers go?
I mean, I guess the response is, well, to what I just said is, well, we shouldn't have American interests or troops in the Middle East anyway. So if an Iranian nuke allows them to use more terror or conventional means to advance their interests and to kill people, then, well, it's not our problem. We should be out of there. But as you point out, their solution is like, instead of 5 deadly fireworks in a box, let's increase the size of the box and let's have 70 deadly fireworks in the box through hyperproliferation. And that doesn't make America safer at all. I think you're correct. I also remembered what I wanted to say a few minutes ago. So we'll still cut out the part where I lost my train of thought.
We will or we won't.
Well, I know. I never know.
You're they're very challenging to Abe's technical editing.
Well, fine. So to make the point, the danger there is not a danger. It is a consequence of American involvement that hasn't been much commented on, and that is when Trump, or if Trump intervenes, this is now an American operation. I mean, as we said earlier, you can track in real time on social media the flights from Europe. You can see the photos of not only how we're sending things into the region, but we're also withdrawing certain things. So there were great images of Al Udeid Air Force Base, where there were planes on the tarmac one day, and then the next day, the planes aren't on the tarmac anymore, in preparation for a potential Iranian retaliation. So we're seeing this happening. And if Trump makes a call, then all of a sudden, I mean, America, the big dog, is now involved. What that means is, yes, Fordo's probably over, right? B-52, boom, boom, like my Israeli friend said. But it also means Trump decides when the war ends. And this is kind of interesting. Unless Trump just comes on television and says to the world, look, we're one and done. We're destroying this, and then I'm going to let Israel handle it. Then it becomes a little bit more complicated. If instead he says, we're into this, we're going to make sure the Iranian nuclear program is totally defanged. Well, is there going to be a point where maybe Israel wants to keep going a little bit farther, but Trump says, well, now the Ayatollah is coming to the table, and I've done a lot of damage. So maybe it's BB. It's time to end the campaign. I think that's an unanswered question.
This also is in a way another rebuke to Michael Brendan Doherty's argument, because his argument is very much looking at just this one country. He's not looking at all also about future nuclear alliances and right now, Iran doesn't have a lot of friends in the world coming to its aid, but that doesn't mean, as Matt says, if it's a sustained campaign, if the US actually comes in, China, Russia, other countries could then start to align with Iran. And that's another rebuke, I think, to Michael's isolationist argument about why we don't need to be involved. We do.
According to Amit Segal, whom I've mentioned before on this podcast, that's AMITSEGAL. Just if you people have been asking me because I've cited his name, and then they're like, I don't remember his name, and who is it, and how can I read his stuff? If you Google his name, you can subscribe to his daily
He's fantastic
newsletter or listen to him on Dan Senor's Call Me Back podcast. He says that the argument that Bibi and Ron Dermer, who is Bibi's sort of like brain trust, have been making to Trump and in the administration is, Mr. President, you say you don't start wars, you end them. End this war. You can end this war for us. If you take out Ford, the war is over. Like, so this is where you're, Matt. If this is what they're saying to him, then your scenario doesn't hold.
No,
they're not going to go any further.
I hope that's the case.
That they're not going to go any further, and that what they have done is they have looked at Trump closely. They are incredibly grateful to him. They believe he is their great friend. They were nervous, I think, about how far he was going to let Steve Witkoff go in negotiating with the Iranians, but that they had confidence that he, in fact, was on their side, and they believed him when he said he didn't want to get Iran a nuclear weapon. And they are trusting that he means what he says when he says, I don't start wars. He didn't start this war. Right. Israel started this war. Trump and Rubio said 2 hours after the war started that the United States had no role in this war, that it had not given the green light, it had done nothing, that America was simply doing things to protect American interests and American personnel in the Middle East. So the message was clearly, Israel went this alone. It started this war by itself. And Trump can say, and now I'm going to end it. There were two ways for me to end it. I could end it before it began, with Iran agreeing to a negotiated solution to the problem. Right. Iran made that impossible, and now unconditional surrender is the other way to end the war. And there are two ways to do that, one of which is for Iran to do what we said, which is come to the table, say, we're done, we're humiliated, we will destroy everything, we will promise never to strike Israel, we will accept sanctions, whatever it is that unconditional surrender means, or their entire capability of doing anything aggressive and offensive against any other country will be destroyed for 3 generations to come. And that's either Israel does it or America does it. But Trump can do it. Trump can end the war. That is what Bibi and Dermer were telling Trump and Vance and Rubio and Witkoff and whoever it is that Trump is listening to. And I think it's a pretty solid argument.
I also think that Israel's done America a great favor if Trump decides to attack Fordow, and that is by destroying the missile launchers, the mobile surface-to-surface missile launchers, which has depleted the Iranian capacity to strike targets. Now, as we know from the headlines this morning, it's not total incapacitation. And as great as Israel's missile defenses are, as great as this air campaign against the missile launchers has been, there is still the Iranian ability to strike at, in this case, and in fact, in every case, civilian targets, right? However, I think the longer this has gone on with just the Israelis taking lead, fighting offensively, it's reducing the Iranians' ability to hit back at American forces if Trump decides to say go.
Right. So as we stand here poised and waiting, I wanted to point out that not only is today Juneteenth, but as people have noted over the last couple of days. Amit Segal himself also in his superb newsletter. Today is on the Jewish calendar, on the Jewish calendar, I guess, is the 23rd day of the month of Sivan. And people have noted to me over the course of the last week, and will note if they read my rant in the current issue, that I keep invoking the idea that there is something more metaphysical going on here than merely the practical warfare that is happening. And let me take a pause here to say that I thought it was pretty striking in the Ted Cruz Tucker Carlson exchange that when Ted Cruz said, I was educated as a religious person, and I was told that the Bible says that those who bless Israel shall be blessed, and that those who curse Israel shall be cursed. And I basically operated that way in my public life. To Tucker's squinting, scoffing, surprised expression in which he said, well, does Israel mean the government of Bibi Netanyahu? And Cruz said, yes. That is the ingathering of the Jews, a nation of Jews, right where it was when God made, not right where it was, because this rule was made with Abraham before there was an Israel, but right there in the Middle East, and there are the Jews. And so if anything can be said to be Israel, it's Israel. And that's what God said. So Cruz, I think, had the better of that exchange, even though the funny part is that the people who would find Tucker's squinting and scoffing and all of that, supportive of their worldview are the wildly secular who think that anybody who ever invokes a religious idea is somehow a fanatic and, should be banned from public life, like school prayer. He said that, and then he also said to Tucker, I'm very confused by you, because all you do here, this is the 49th time that you've invoked Israel. Israel. What is your fixation? Why are you and people like you fixated on Israel? What's the matter with you? And Tucker said, I'm not fixated on Israel. And then he literally started to say, many of my close friends are, and then Cruz cut him off to say something else. He was literally going to go to the most comic anti-Semitic trope of all, or most of all racist tropes, which is, I can't possibly be racist or anti-Semitic. I have friends who are Jewish. I'm sure Tucker has friends who are Jewish. Peter Beinert's not his friend, but there are anti-Semitic Jews all over the place. It doesn't matter.
They agree
I
on
was
quite a
once
bit.
his friend, not his friend anymore. But I bring this up only to say that this question of what is going on in a planet in which this Jewish nation has this insane degree of military success over a country that is literally 10 times larger than in terms of landmass and population, and is the representative of a continuing civilization itself thousands of years old, with a great literary tradition and a great civilization, not really something that was ever imperially controlled, all of that. So something weird is going on, in my view. Not weird, but deep. And a reader of ours named Russ Manis sent a really wonderful little essay here that I want to read, and then we'll close off. This week on the Jewish calendar marks the events that are celebrated on the Jewish holiday of Purim, which marks the victory of Jewish citizens of the ancient Persian Empire over their rabidly anti-Semitic enemies. The king was called Ahasuerus, and his vizier was named Haman. And Haman had succeeded in coaxing Ahasuerus to issue an edict to kill every Jewish man, woman, and child in his empire, i.e., Israel will not exist any longer. We will wipe Israel off the map. Let's just go into the 21st century and the statements of the two first presidents of Iran in the 21st century. The string of edicts that eventually unfolds to reverse that and bring about Haman's eventual downfall and execution, That's the role of Queen Esther in pleading with the king to reverse the edict, the role of her uncle Mordecai in uncovering the plot to assassinate the king, are chronicled in the book of Esther. Striking, because the name of God is not mentioned even once in the book of Esther. But the whole point of retelling the story is to underscore the hand of God in these events. Thursday, June 19th, today, is the 23rd day of Sivan on the Jewish calendar. It is reported in the book of Esther that on that specific day, Esther and Mordecai's actions combined to reverse the king's mind. Haman was executed. The king's edict against the Jews was ordered to be publicly rescinded throughout his empire, and the Jews were empowered to assemble and defend themselves against any attacks by its enemies. The episode ends in the words of the book of Esther, the Megillah, and the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness, and honor. That final verse has secured a central place in Jewish liturgy for centuries. It is recited at the conclusion of the Sabbath each Saturday night in the Havdalah service in the presence of a lit candle, along with a blessing thanking God who separates between light and darkness. Purim is a very interesting holiday in the Jewish calendar. It is the day in which Jews are directed to get drunk. They're supposed to celebrate and get drunk, so drunk that they can no longer remember whether they're supposed to say that Mordecai is blessed and Haman is cursed, or whether Haman is blessed and Mordecai is cursed. So blotto are they supposed to get with the celebration of this moment of salvation of the Jewish people. And that's today. Let's see what happens today. We're going to convene again tomorrow. That will be the 20th. That'll be the day after. That'll be the day after the day that was mentioned in the Megillah. We'll see what today brings. So for Matt, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.